A powerful architect abandons his wife in her darkest hour, replacing her with a younger model to complete his perfect life. She later told him, "The person you abandoned is gone, and she owes you nothing." What happened next left everyone stunned. He was the king of the city, celebrating his success, when she walked in, escorted by a reclusive billionaire who could ruin him with a single phone call. Was this the ultimate revenge plot, or something far more devastating? This is the story of how an empire built on lies crumbled, and a woman forged her own in truth. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. The Vance Architecture Annual Gala was less a party and more a coronation. Leo Vance, standing on the mezzanine of his firm's gleaming headquarters, surveyed the scene with a satisfaction so deep it was almost serene. The building itself was his masterpiece, a twisting skyscraper of glass and steel that had reshaped the city's skyline and cemented his legacy. Tonight, the grand atrium was filled with the city's elite, developers with billion-dollar portfolios, art critics whose words could make or break careers, and socialites who collected influence like jewelry. And at the center of it all was him. "They're eating it up," Chloe Sterling whispered, her fingers tracing a light pattern on his tuxedo sleeve. She was breathtaking, a vision in emerald silk that clung to her like a second skin. Her youth wasn't just in her unlined face, but in her bright, uncomplicated optimism, a stark contrast to the life he'd left behind. She was an interior designer on the rise, and their relationship was a synergistic masterpiece of public relations. The brilliant architect and his beautiful artistic muse. "We're giving them a good show," Leo murmured back, his smile never faltering as he caught the eye of a major city councilman and gave a subtle nod. Everything was performance. He had learned that the hard way. Strength wasn't an internal state. It was a perception you relentlessly curated. His gaze swept the room again, cataloguing his victories. The Sterling Tower project, his most ambitious yet, was a week from breaking ground. He had just landed the cover of Architecture Digest. He had Chloe. He had finally, definitively won. The messy, grief-stricken chapter of his life with Nenah was over. He had cut the cord, amputated the limb that had threatened to drag him down into the darkness with it. The divorce had been brutal but necessary. He needed light, progress, a future that wasn't haunted by the suffocating silence that had filled their home. He thought of Nenah rarely now, and when he did, it was with a distant, almost clinical pity. He pictured her in that small, dreary apartment she'd rented, surrounded by books and the ghosts of the past. A brilliant mind, a sharp wit, but utterly incapable of moving on. He had to move on, for both of them, he'd told himself. A fresh wave of photographers swarmed the base of the grand staircase, their flashes momentarily blinding. "Someone important has arrived," Chloe noted, craning her neck. Leo followed her gaze, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. Who could possibly command this much attention and upstage his moment? He expected a celebrity, perhaps a politician looking for a photo op. But the crowd parted, and a hush fell over the room. It wasn't a loud silence, but a thick, curious one. And through the gap, she walked. For a disoriented second, Leo's brain refused to process the image. He saw a woman in a gown the color of midnight, tailored with an almost severe elegance that highlighted a strength he'd never seen in her. Her dark hair, once a wild mane he'd loved to bury his face in, was styled in a sleek, sophisticated arrangement that exposed the elegant line of her neck. Her face was the same, yet entirely different. The soft vulnerability around her eyes had been replaced by a focused, intelligent calm. The tentative smile he remembered was gone, her expression poised and unreadable. It was Nenah, but it wasn't. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. It was like seeing a black and white photograph of someone you knew, suddenly and impossibly rendered in vivid, startling color. And then he saw the man whose arm she held, Elias Thorne. If Leo was a king in the world of architecture, Elias Thorne was an emperor of a vast, unseen empire. A reclusive billionaire who controlled shipping, tech and media with a quiet, terrifying influence. He rarely made public appearances. Thorne didn't court the spotlight. The spotlight rearranged itself around him. He was older, with a mane of silver hair and a face that looked as if it were carved from granite, his eyes holding a chillingly placid intelligence. They moved through the room not as guests, but as a gravitational force. The whispers followed them, a ripple of shock and speculation. Nenah Reyes, with Elias Thorne. Leo felt Chloe's hand tighten on his arm. "Leo, who is that?" He couldn't speak. His throat was a knot of concrete. He watched Nenah, his Nenah, the woman who used to wear his old sweaters and cry over sad movies, the woman he had held as she'd wept over their shared unspeakable loss, as she laughed at something Elias Thorne murmured in her ear. It was a low, confident sound that echoed across the suddenly silent atrium. Her eyes, dark and luminous, finally swept the room and landed on him. There was no flicker of pain, no hint of longing. There was nothing, just a cool, level assessment. A stranger looking at a stranger. In that single empty glance, Leo Vance felt the gleaming glass floor of his perfect life crack beneath his feet. The spotlight was no longer on him. It had followed her, and in its glare he saw for the first time that the past he thought he had buried was not dead. It had been waiting, and it had just arrived, escorted by a man who could burn his entire world to the ground. The spell broke as quickly as it had been cast. The ambient chatter of the gala resumed, but its tone had changed. It was no longer a relaxed hum of celebration, but a frantic electric buzz of gossip. Leo could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes darting between him on the mezzanine and the impossible couple holding court near the entrance. He and Chloe were no longer the main attraction. They were now a data point in a much more fascinating story. "Leo, you're white as a sheet," Chloe said, her voice tight with a new, sharp edge of anxiety. "Is that her? Your ex-wife?" He managed a nod, his jaw so tight it ached. Nenah. Saying her name felt foreign, like speaking a language he'd long forgotten. He had to regain control of the narrative. This was his night, his triumph. He would not let her phantom presence unravel it. Straightening his tie, he forced a mask of urbane nonchalance. "Well, the city is smaller than you think. Come on, let's go mingle. We need to speak with the Hendersons about the waterfront bid." It was a transparently weak attempt to steer the ship, and Chloe knew it. Her smile was brittle as she let him lead her down the sweeping staircase, her emerald dress whispering against the marble. With every step, Leo felt as though he were descending into an arena. All the faces that had been beaming at him moments before now held a new, predatory curiosity. They smelled blood in the water. They were intercepted halfway to the bar by Jonathan Finch, a rival architect with a perpetually smug grin. "Vance! Quite the party!" Finch boomed, his eyes flicking unsubtly toward Nenah and Thorne. "Didn't realize you were still on such good terms. Thorne is a hell of a +1 to bring to your ex's party. Ballsy." "We're civilized adults, Jonathan," Leo replied, his voice dangerously smooth. "Unlike some." He steered Chloe away, but the damage was done. The encounter had confirmed everyone's suspicions. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a statement. He couldn't avoid it. He had to face her. To ignore her would be a sign of weakness, an admission of defeat. Taking 2 glasses of champagne from a passing waiter, he handed one to Chloe, who took it with a shaky hand. "Stay here for a moment," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He moved through the crowd, which parted for him like the Red Sea. He felt 100 different pressures at once, the weight of his reputation, the sting of his pride, the confusing, gut-wrenching sight of the woman he once knew so intimately looking like a stranger. Elias Thorne saw him coming first. The older man's eyes, a pale, piercing grey, met his. There was no animosity in them, just a calm, dismissive appraisal, as if he were looking at a mildly interesting piece of furniture. It was infinitely more insulting than open hostility. Nenah turned then, her expression unreadable. "Nenah," Leo said, forcing a cordial smile, "I'm surprised to see you here." "Leo," she replied, her voice as cool and polished as the marble floor, "you throw the most talked-about party of the year. Why would I be anywhere else?" There was no sarcasm in her tone, just a simple statement of fact that somehow managed to cut him to the quick. "This is Elias Thorne," she said, gesturing to the man beside her. "Mr. Thorne, an honor," Leo said, extending a hand. Thorne took it. His grip was firm, dry and brief. "Vance, impressive building." He said it with the same emotional investment one might use to comment on the weather. It was a compliment designed to feel like a dismissal. "And you are Chloe Sterling," Nenah said, her eyes finally moving to acknowledge Chloe, who had drifted closer, unable to stay away. "I've seen your work. Your use of color is very bold." "Thank you," Chloe managed, looking completely out of her depth. She was a weapon in a battle she hadn't known she was fighting, and she was suddenly facing a battleship. The four of them stood in a pocket of suffocating silence, the party raging around them. It was a tableau of past and present, a collision of two worlds Leo had fought desperately to keep separate. He looked at Nenah, really looked at her, searching for a flicker of the woman he'd left. He saw nothing, no pain, no anger, just a placid, impenetrable confidence. The power imbalance was staggering. He, the host, the man of the hour, felt like an intruder in his own celebration. She, the uninvited ghost, was holding all the cards. "Well, we won't keep you," Nenah said finally, a hint of a smile touching her lips as she turned back to Thorne. "Enjoy your evening, Leo. It's a remarkable achievement." And with that, they turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd, leaving Leo and Chloe in their wake. The interaction had lasted less than 2 minutes, but the battlefield had been redrawn. Chloe turned to him, her eyes wide with a dawning, fearful understanding. "She's not what you said she was, Leo. I don't know what she is anymore," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as he watched Nenah accept a glass of water from a waiter, her posture radiating an elegance and power that had been forged in a fire he had started. He had told Chloe and himself that he had left Nenah because she was weak, because her grief was drowning them both. But looking at her now, he was confronted with a terrifying new possibility. Perhaps he had been the weak one all along. The gala ended, but the silence that followed Leo home was louder than any applause. He and Chloe had moved through the rest of the evening like automatons, their smiles fixed, their conversations hollow. The air between them in the car ride back to his starkly minimalist penthouse was thick with unspoken questions. Chloe went straight to the guest room, a silent, damning statement, leaving Leo alone in the vast, moonlit living room that had once felt like a fortress of success, and now felt like a pristine, empty cage. He poured a whiskey, the amber liquid catching the city lights, but he didn't drink it. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the metropolis he had sought to conquer. Tonight, it felt like it was mocking him. His mind, against his will, replayed not the gala, but the years before it. The memories came in sharp, painful fragments. He saw Nenah in their first apartment, a chaotic, joyful mess of books and half-finished paintings, her face smudged with charcoal as she laughed at one of his dumb jokes. He remembered her hunched over her laptop at 3 a.m., chasing a lead for an investigative piece with a fierce tenacity that had both intimidated and thrilled him. She was a force of nature then, vibrant and alive. He had been the steady, ambitious one. She had been the brilliant, passionate one. Together they had felt invincible. Then came the ascent. His firm took off. They bought a beautiful brownstone. Life was supposed to be perfect. They decided to start a family. And that's when the silence began. The first miscarriage was a tragedy they promised to face together. The second was a quiet devastation that left a hairline crack in their foundation. The doctor's appointments, the hushed clinical language of infertility, diminished ovarian reserve, low probability, became the new soundtrack of their lives. The joy drained away, replaced by a grueling mechanical cycle of hope and despair. Leo remembered the night it all shattered. They had gotten the final conclusive results from the last round of IVF. Failure. Complete and irreversible. He had come home to find Nenah in the nursery they had painted a hopeful sunshine yellow. She wasn't crying. She was just standing in the middle of the room, her hand resting on the empty crib, her expression utterly vacant. "It's over, Leo," she had whispered, not looking at him. He, who built monuments of strength out of concrete and steel, could not bear the sight of her brokenness. It was a mirror, reflecting his own crushing sense of failure, of inadequacy. He was a man who designed futures, and he couldn't even build the one that mattered most. "We can adopt," he'd said, his voice sounding hollow and false even to his own ears. He was offering a solution, a blueprint, when what she needed was a hand to hold in the rubble. She had finally turned to him then, her eyes filled with a grief so profound it felt like an accusation. "You don't get it," she'd said, her voice raspy. "I didn't just want a baby. I wanted our baby. I wanted to feel it, to be a part of it. And now there's just this emptiness." He couldn't handle the emptiness. It terrified him. It was a void, a failure in design. So he did what he did best. He started drawing new plans. He threw himself into his work with a desperate frenzy, working 18-hour days, taking meetings in other cities, filling his life with noise and movement to drown out the silence at home. He told himself he was providing, securing their future. But he was running. He'd left her, piece by piece, long before he packed his bags. He stopped asking how she was. He flinched away from her touch. Her quiet sorrow felt like a judgment on his inability to fix it. He began to resent her for it, for being a living reminder of their shared failure. The final conversation was brutally civil. He told her he wasn't happy, that they had become different people, that they were holding each other back. All polite, meaningless euphemisms for the ugly truth. "Your grief is too heavy for me. I want to be happy, and you are the embodiment of my unhappiness." She hadn't fought him. She had just looked at him with those tired, knowing eyes and said, "I see." He had left, and within months he had met Chloe. Bright, sunny, uncomplicated Chloe, whose only ambition was to design beautiful spaces and be seen at the right parties. She was the antidote to Nenah. She was a fresh coat of paint over the water-stained walls of his past. Standing in his penthouse now, the untouched whiskey in his hand, Leo felt a wave of self-loathing so intense it made him dizzy. He hadn't left a weak woman. He had abandoned his partner in the middle of a war zone because he was a coward. He had fled the fire, and she had been forced to either burn or forge herself into something new in the flames. Tonight, he'd seen what she had become. The steel in her spine, the composure in her gaze. It wasn't a gift from Elias Thorne. It was a weapon she had forged herself in the silence and the emptiness he had left her in. And for the first time, Leo Vance, the master architect, looked at the life he had built and realized with sickening certainty that its foundations were rotten to the core. The ride from the gala was silent, but it was a comfortable silence, unlike the one suffocating Leo in his penthouse across town. Nenah Reyes leaned her head against the cool leather of Elias Thorne's Bentley, the city lights painting fleeting streaks across her face. The adrenaline of the evening was beginning to fade, leaving a familiar, quiet ache in its place. "Are you all right?" Elias asked, his voice a low rumble that never seemed to demand an answer, only to offer the space for one. "I'm fine," Nenah said, and she was surprised to find it was mostly true. "It was less than I expected, and more." Elias gave a slight, knowing nod. "He's smaller than you remember, isn't he? They always are, once you're on the outside looking in." That was it, precisely. Leo, who had once been her entire world, a titan in her eyes, now just seemed like a man in an expensive suit, desperately trying to convince everyone of his own importance. The power he projected was a hollow shell. She had seen it tonight, and the knowledge was both liberating and deeply sad. Their relationship was a subject of intense speculation, which suited Elias perfectly. The truth was far less scandalous and far more profound. He hadn't found her in a glamorous bar or at a high society auction. He had found her, metaphorically speaking, in a graveyard. A year after the divorce, Nenah had been adrift. The settlement from Leo was enough to live on, but she had no life to spend it on. Her career in investigative journalism was a distant memory. She felt hollowed out, a ghost in her own skin. To feel anything, to connect with some kind of structure, she had started writing again, but not the hard-hitting exposés of her past. She took on freelance work, writing obituaries for a small, respected local paper. She found a strange solace in it, in chronicling the lives of others, their loves, their achievements, their quiet, everyday moments. She poured her skill into it, crafting beautiful, poignant tributes to strangers. One of those strangers was a quiet, unassuming accountant who had worked for one of Elias Thorne's subsidiary companies for 40 years. Days after it was published, she received an email. The sender was E. Thorne. The message was simple. "You wrote about my employee, Henry Gable. You saw the man, not just the numbers. I would like to meet you." She had met him in a dusty private library that smelled of old paper and leather. He wasn't the ruthless corporate predator the media portrayed. He was quiet, observant, and possessed a mind of startling clarity. He asked her about her life, her work, her past. She, to her own surprise, told him everything. The career she had sacrificed, the crushing grief, the divorce. She spoke without tears, her voice flat and detached, recounting the story as if it had happened to someone else. When she finished, he didn't offer pity. He offered a proposition. "Grief is a crucible," he'd said, his pale eyes fixed on her. "It either breaks you or it burns away the non-essential. I believe you have been refined. That journalist you were is still in there, but she's stronger now, sharper." He explained his motive. He was launching a new independent media foundation dedicated to long-form, deep-dive investigative journalism free from corporate influence. He called it the Verity Project. He wasn't offering her a job, he was offering her an entire division to build from the ground up. "Why me?" she had asked, bewildered. "Because you know how to find the story beneath the surface," he'd replied. "And because the world is run by men like your ex-husband, men who build beautiful facades to hide the rot within. I want to fund people who aren't afraid to look at the rot." It was a lifeline. More than that, it was a purpose. She had poured every ounce of her being into it. Elias was a mentor, a sponsor, a formidable ally. He demanded excellence and gave her absolute autonomy. He taught her about power, not the loud, performative kind Leo chased, but the quiet, structural power that moved markets and shaped policy. Tonight's appearance at the gala had been his idea. "It's time," he had said simply. "Not for revenge. For re-entry. You need to walk back into that world on your own terms so you can see it for what it is, and so they can see you for who you are." He also had a secondary, more strategic motive. The developer Leo was courting for his Sterling Tower project, a man named Robert Prescott, was a man Thorne knew to be corrupt. Prescott's company had a history of cutting corners, exploiting labor, and was tied to an offshore money laundering scheme Elias's own people were quietly investigating. "Prescott is a peacock," Elias had told her, "but he's a timid one. He's terrified of real scrutiny. Our presence here tonight together will be a signal to him. It will make him nervous. A man like that can't afford to be in the orbit of the Verity Project." Now, in the car, Nenah processed it all. "So this wasn't just about me, was it?" "50% about you," Elias said, a rare, faint smile touching his lips. 50% a calculated business move. The best ventures in life are the ones where principle and pragmatism align. Nenah looked out the window. She had walked into that gala expecting to feel a storm of emotions, pain, anger, regret. Instead, she felt a profound, clarifying calm. She wasn't Nenah Vance, the broken ex-wife. She was Nenah Reyes, the head of the Verity Project. Her past with Leo wasn't a source of shame. It was the crucible that had forged her, and Elias Thorne hadn't saved her. He had simply opened a door and recognized that she was strong enough to walk through it on her own. The morning after the gala, the city's most influential business newsletter landed in the inboxes of its 10,000 subscribers. It led not with Leo's architectural triumph, but with a grainy photo of Nenah Reyes and Elias Thorne captioned, "The Thorne Doctrine, reclusive billionaire's surprise appearance at Vance Gala signals new market scrutiny." The article was brief, speculative, but devastatingly effective. It painted Thorne's presence not as a social call, but as a strategic move, hinting that his new mysterious media venture, the Verity Project, headed by none other than Nenah Reyes, had set its sights on the city's booming real estate sector. Leo read it on his phone, the words blurring in front of his eyes. His hand was shaking. His PR team was already in damage control mode, but it was like trying to patch a dam with chewing gum. The first call came at 9:05 a.m. It was Robert Prescott, the developer for the Sterling Tower. "Leo, what the hell was that last night?" Prescott's voice, usually a confident baritone, was strained and high-pitched. "You didn't tell me your ex-wife was working for Elias Thorne." "I didn't know, Robert," Leo said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is as much of a surprise to me as it is to you." "A surprise? My investors are calling me Leo. They're spooked. Thorne doesn't go to parties. When he shows up somewhere, it's for a reason. And his new pet project is some kind of muckraking journalism outfit. Headed by the woman you left. This looks bad. This looks targeted." "It's personal, Robert, that's all. It has nothing to do with the project," Leo insisted, but his words felt hollow. "There's no such thing as personal when you're dealing with a man like Thorne," Prescott snapped. "I need you to fix this. Assure me that we are not about to be the subject of some deep dive expose. I have clauses in my contracts about negative press. You need to handle your ex-wife." The line went dead. Handle your ex-wife. The phrase echoed in Leo's head, arrogant and dismissive, and yet it filled him with a cold dread. How could he possibly handle the woman he saw last night? She was utterly beyond his reach, his influence. He swept into his office, barking orders at his staff, projecting an aura of control he did not feel. His entire morning was a series of panicked calls, reassuring investors, and lying through his teeth. He found Chloe in his office around noon, staring at the miniature model of the Sterling Tower that sat on a pedestal in the corner. She looked as if she hadn't slept. "My father called me," she said, not turning around. Her father was a minor partner in Prescott's development firm. He was, concerned. "It's a misunderstanding. I'm taking care of it," Leo said brusquely, loosening his tie. Chloe finally turned to face him. The bright, adoring light was gone from her eyes, replaced by a cool, appraising disillusionment. "Are you? Or are you just realizing you're not the most powerful person in every room you walk into?" The accusation hit him like a physical slap. "That's not fair, Chloe." "Isn't it?" she shot back, her voice trembling slightly. "You told me she was fragile, a sad little thing you had to escape from. You painted this picture of yourself as the hero of your own story, the man who bravely moved on. But that woman last night, she wasn't fragile, Leo. She looked like she could break you without smudging her lipstick." The raw truth of her words silenced him. "I'm part of this now, aren't I?" Chloe continued, gesturing around the opulent office. "I'm the new lover, the symbol of your great new life. But what happens when the narrative changes? What happens when everyone starts to see you not as the man who escaped, but as the man who made a powerful enemy out of his own wife? Where does that leave me?" She wasn't just hurt, she was afraid. She had hitched her wagon to his star, believing it was the brightest in the sky. Now she was seeing the shadow of a much larger planet eclipsing it, and she was terrified of being left in the cold darkness. "I built this company from nothing," Leo said, his voice low and intense, a desperate attempt to reassert his dominance. I will not let her or Thorn jeopardize it over some petty personal vendetta. You still don't get it, Chloe said with a sad, bitter laugh. You think this is about you. You walked out on her after you'd lost a child, Leo. That's not a petty personal issue. Maybe this isn't a vendetta. Maybe this is just her life. A life she built after you destroyed the first one. And it turns out it's a much bigger, more impressive life than yours. She picked up her purse from his leather sofa. I think I need to stay at my own place for a while, she said quietly. I need to think. She walked out, the click of the closing door echoing in the cavernous office. Leo stood alone, staring at the model of his crowning achievement. The Sterling Tower. A monument to his ambition, his vision, his power. For the first time it looked fragile, like a child's toy that a careless hand could sweep aside. The cracks in his perfect life were no longer invisible. They were chasms, and he was standing at the edge of one, staring into a terrifying, free fall. The offices of the Verity Project were the antithesis of Vance architecture. Housed in a converted red brick warehouse in a less fashionable part of the city, the space was open, functional, and humming with a quiet, focused energy. There were no marble floors or pretentious sculptures, only rows of simple desks, whiteboards covered in frantic scrawls, and the constant low murmur of keyboards and determined voices. This was Nenah's kingdom, built not on aesthetics, but on purpose. She stood at the head of a long conference table, leading a pitch meeting for a new investigation. Her team, a mix of hungry young reporters and seasoned veterans she'd coaxed out of retirement, listened intently. She was in her element here, sharp, incisive, guiding the conversation with a deft hand. She was dissecting a complex web of shell corporations and public land deals, her mind clear and focused. Leo Vance and the glittering world of the gala felt 1,000,000 miles away. But the past was never truly gone. It was just baggage, and some days it was heavier than others. Later that evening, long after her team had gone home, Nenah was cleaning out an old digital folder on her personal laptop, a task she'd been avoiding for years. It was labeled simply Drafts. It was a digital graveyard of unfinished articles, half-formed ideas, and emotional outpourings from the darkest period of her life. Her cursor hovered over one file name, Letter to L Final V3.docs. Her heart gave a painful thud. She hadn't opened this document in over 2 years. She should have deleted it long ago. It was a relic from a different person, a ghost she didn't want to entertain. But tonight, for some reason, she felt a pull. Perhaps it was seeing him, seeing how little he had changed, that made her curious about how much she had. She clicked it open. The words filled the screen, raw and unpolished, a direct transmission from the depths of her pain. Leo, it's 3:17 a.m. I know you hate it when I work this late. Nothing good happens after midnight, you always say. But I can't sleep. The silence in this house is a physical thing. It presses down on me. I keep thinking if I stay perfectly still, I'll hear your key in the lock or your footsteps on the stairs, but there's nothing. I'm trying to understand. I keep replaying our last conversation in my head, searching for a clue I missed. You said we'd grown apart. You said you weren't happy, but it feels bigger than that. It feels like you looked at our life, at the wreckage of our dream, and you decided I was part of the wreckage, something to be cleared away so you could build something new. Was I so hard to look at? Was my sadness so repulsive? I know I wasn't myself. I felt like a stranger in my own body. Some days just breathing felt like a monumental effort, but you were the one person I thought would stay in the trenches with me. I never thought you would be the one to wave a white flag and walk off the battlefield, leaving me surrounded. I look at the yellow nursery. I haven't been able to paint over it. It feels like sacrilege. It was the last thing we built together. It was our hope, solidified into color. Now it's just a room, a monument to what we lost. What we lost, Leo. Not what I lost. It was ours. The grief was ours, but you handed it all to me like it was a heavy suitcase you no longer wanted to carry, and then you walked away, free and unburdened. I don't know who you are anymore, and I think the most terrifying part is that I don't think you know who I am either. You see a broken, sad woman. You don't see the person who is still in here screaming to get out. You don't see the fight. I hope you find the happiness you're looking for. I truly do. But I wonder if you'll ever realize that happiness isn't a structure you can build. It's a garden you have to tend, even when the ground is barren and the sky is grey. You abandoned our garden, Nenah. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sharp. She hadn't cried over him in a long, long time. These weren't tears for the man he was now, but for the man he had been, and for the woman who had loved him so much she had written his name over every blueprint of her future. She closed the document. She didn't delete it. It was a part of her story. The woman at the gala, the leader of the Verity Project, did not exist without the woman who wrote that letter. Her strength wasn't an absence of wounds. It was the scar tissue that had grown over them, tough and resilient. She had fought. Alone, in the silence, she had fought for her own survival, and she had won. Elias hadn't given her strength. He had simply recognized the strength she already possessed. The ache in her chest was real, but it was a phantom pain, a memory of an amputation. The limb was long gone. She had learned to live without it. In fact, she had learned to run. And as she shut down her computer and walked out into the cool night air, Nenah Reyes knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that she was never, ever looking back. 2 weeks after the gala, Leo's world had shrunk. The Sterling Tower project was indefinitely stalled. Robert Prescott wasn't returning his calls. Investors were pulling back, spooked by the mere shadow of Elias Thorne. The buzz around his firm had turned from admiration to morbid speculation. He felt like a ship taking on water, frantically bailing with a teaspoon. Chloe had not come back. They'd had a few stilted, painful phone calls that all ended in the same impasse. She couldn't be with a man whose foundation was cracking, and he couldn't admit it was. Desperate, Leo did the one thing he felt he had left to do. He called Nenah's office. He didn't ask for her. He left a message with her assistant. "Leo Vance, I need to speak with her. It's important." He didn't expect a reply, but the next day his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Westfield Park, the Fountain, 4 p.m. today. Don't be late." It was a cold, impersonal summons, and it stung his pride, but he knew he had to go. Westfield Park was a neutral space, a place from a time before their lives had become complicated. They used to walk there on lazy Sunday afternoons in the early years of their marriage. The choice of location felt deliberate, a subtle reminder of what he had thrown away. He arrived first, his hands shoved in the pockets of his expensive overcoat, looking entirely out of place among the mothers pushing strollers and old men playing chess. He felt a raw, exposed nerve. She arrived exactly at 4, not in a gown, but in simple tailored trousers and a cashmere sweater. She looked like herself again, but a version of herself that was sharper, more defined. She didn't offer a greeting, just stood before him, her hands in her own pockets, her expression calm. "You wanted to talk," she said. It wasn't a question. "Nenah, He had rehearsed a dozen speeches, but now, faced with her unnerving composure, the words caught in his throat. "I'm sorry." It came out sounding weak, pathetic. She just looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "Sorry for what, specifically, Leo? Because there's a rather long list. Are you sorry for leaving, for how you left? Or are you sorry that your life is currently imploding because I happen to find a new job?" The directness of it was like a bucket of ice water. "It's not about the project," he lied, and they both knew it. "It's about us, about what happened. I was a coward." "Yes, you were," she agreed with no emotion whatsoever. "What else is new?" He flinched. "I couldn't handle it. The grief, your grief, it was too much." For the first time, a flicker of something raw and fiery appeared in her eyes. "My grief," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous pitch. "Did you think I was enjoying it, Leo? Did you think I wanted to be that person, that hollowed-out shell? It was our grief. It was supposed to be our burden. But you made me carry it alone." "I know," he whispered, his own shame a heavy weight in his chest. "I know, and I'm sorry." "No, you're not," she said, taking a step closer. The quiet fury radiating from her was more intimidating than any shouting match could ever be. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry for the consequences. You're here because your big, shiny project is falling apart, and you think I have some magic wand to fix it. You think Thorn will call off the dogs if I ask him to. You're here to manage me." He had no defense because she was right. His apology was self-serving, a desperate gambit to save himself. "There are no dogs, Leo," she continued, her voice softening slightly but with an edge of steel. "Elias isn't targeting you. He doesn't care enough about you to target you. He's investigating Robert Prescott because Prescott is a crook. You just happened to be standing next to him. You made a bad bet. You built your masterpiece on corrupted land. A fitting metaphor, don't you think?" He stared at her, the full, devastating truth of his situation finally crashing down on him. It wasn't a vendetta. It was worse. He was collateral damage in a war he didn't even know was being fought. He was insignificant. "I came here today because I wanted to look you in the eye and say this," Nenah said, her voice now completely calm, all the fire extinguished, leaving only a cold resolve. "The person you abandoned is gone. I mourned her along with everything else we lost. The woman standing in front of you now is not your wife. She is not your past. And she owes you nothing, not an explanation, not forgiveness, and certainly not her help." She held his gaze for a long moment, and in her eyes he saw not hatred, but a profound and final indifference. It was the cruelest cut of all. "Goodbye, Leo," she said softly. She turned and walked away, her footsteps sure and steady on the gravel path. She didn't look back. Leo Vance stood by the fountain, the sound of the splashing water a mocking applause. He was alone, stripped of his power, his pride, and his illusions. The reckoning had come and gone, and it had left him in the ruins of a life he had only pretended to build. The encounter in the park was a demolition. It leveled the last remaining structures of Leo's denial, leaving him standing in an empty field of his own failures. Nenah's words, particularly the accusation that he had built his masterpiece on corrupted land, haunted him. It was a perfect, damning summary of his entire life. He returned to his office, but he didn't go to his grand corner suite. Instead, he went to the drafting room, a place he hadn't spent significant time in for years. The air smelled of paper and graphite. He ran his hand over the edge of a drafting table, a relic in an age of digital design. This was where it had all started, with a pencil and a dream. A dream that had somewhere along the way become curdled by ambition and ego. He pulled up the schematics for the Sterling Tower on a large monitor. For hours he just looked at it. He saw the elegant lines, the innovative use of materials, the sheer, audacious scale of it. But for the first time he saw it through Nenah's eyes. He saw the vanity. He saw the soullessness. It wasn't a building for people, it was a monument to himself, funded by a man who was likely a criminal. A profound sense of disgust washed over him. This was his legacy, a gleaming tower built on a rotten foundation. His assistant buzzed him on the intercom. "Mr. Vance, Robert Prescott is on line 1. He's finally calling back." For a moment, the old Leo resurfaced. The instinct to salvage, to negotiate, to win. He could grovel, he could make promises, he could probably still save the project, save his reputation. But what would he be saving? He picked up the phone. Leo speaking. "Vance," Prescott's voice was clipped. "I've done some digging. This Verity project thing is real. It's a problem. I'm pulling my funding. The deal is dead." Prescott was trying to frame it as his decision, a power play to the very end. The old Leo would have argued, threatened, fought. The new Leo, the one standing in the rubble of his own making, felt a strange, unexpected sense of relief. "I understand, Robert," Leo said, his voice calm and clear. "In fact, I was just about to call you. Vance Architecture is withdrawing from the Sterling Tower project, effective immediately. We will not have our name associated with it or with you." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You're... what? You can't do that. You'll be ruined." "Perhaps," Leo said, "but some foundations are worth rebuilding from scratch. Goodbye, Robert." He hung up the phone. He felt light. The terror was still there. The uncertainty of the future was a vast, dark ocean. But for the first time in years, he felt clean. It was his first decision not based on perception, ego, or fear, but on a flicker of his long-forgotten integrity. Meanwhile, across town, Nenah stood in a buzzing press room as the first edition of the Verity Project's new online journal went live. Their lead story was not about Robert Prescott. That investigation was still weeks from being ready. It was an explosive, meticulously researched exposé on predatory lending practices in low-income neighborhoods, a story one of her young reporters had chased for 6 months. Her phone began to ring, then her team's phones. News alerts started popping up. The story was a bombshell. It was real journalism, making a real impact. Looking at the excited, proud faces of her team, Nenah felt a warmth spread through her chest that no gala or public acclaim could ever match. This was real. This mattered. Elias Thorne appeared at the doorway of her office, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "Congratulations, Nenah," he said. "You've built something remarkable." "We built something remarkable," she corrected him, smiling back. Her gaze drifted to the window. She thought of Leo, not with anger or pity, but with a final, quiet detachment. Their story was over. It was a chapter in a book she had now closed. She was the author of a new one, and the pages were just beginning to fill. 6 months later, the name Leo Vance no longer dominated the headlines. Vance Architecture had undergone a painful but necessary downsizing. The gleaming headquarters, a symbol of his hubris, had been sold. He now operated out of a small, modest studio in the same warehouse district as the Verity Project, a fact not lost on him. Most of his high-powered clients had abandoned him, viewing his withdrawal from the Sterling Tower as an act of career suicide. They were right, in a way. The career of Leo Vance, the celebrity architect, was over. But the career of Leo Vance, the architect, was just beginning. He sat hunched over a drafting table, a real one, sketching with charcoal on heavy paper. He was designing a community arts center for an underserved neighborhood. The budget was shoestring. The recognition would be non-existent. But the project felt more real and more important than any skyscraper he had ever conceived. He was building for people again, not for his own ego. He was thinner, with lines of exhaustion and humility etched around his eyes. He worked late, not out of manic ambition, but out of a quiet passion he had rediscovered. He was alone, but he was not lonely. The silence in his small studio was a creative silence, a peaceful one. One afternoon, while taking a break at a small coffee shop, he saw a newspaper. On the front page was a picture of Nenah Reyes. She was standing on the steps of City Hall, surrounded by reporters, having just accepted a prestigious award for her team's exposé on Robert Prescott, whose empire had crumbled under the weight of their investigation. Leo looked at the photo. He saw the woman she had become, poised, powerful, and deeply respected. A pang of something went through him, but he was surprised to find it wasn't jealousy or regret. It was a distant, quiet sense of pride. A pride that was completely detached from himself. It was an acknowledgement of her strength, her resilience, her victory. She had not only survived the fire he had left her in, she had emerged from it and learned to command the flames. He bought the paper, folded it, and took it back to his studio. He didn't hide it. He pinned it to a corkboard on the wall, among the sketches for the Arts Center. It was a reminder of the cost of cowardice, but also a reminder of the incredible human capacity to rebuild. He had torn his own life down to the studs. The old blueprint was ash. Now, day by day, pencil line by pencil line, he was drawing a new one. It wouldn't be as grand as the old one. It wouldn't touch the sky, but he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that this time the foundation would be strong enough to last. The journey from the spotlight's glare to the quiet truth of one's own character is often the most dramatic story of all. Leo's fall from grace was not just a loss of status, but the painful, necessary demolition of a life built on illusion. Nenah's rise was not an act of revenge, but a powerful reclamation of the self she had almost lost. Their story reminds us that true strength isn't about the world you conquer, but the one you build within yourself after everything has been torn down. It's about finding that the most impressive structures are not made of steel and glass, but of resilience, integrity, and the courage to draw a new blueprint, even from the ashes. If their story of betrayal, power, and ultimate redemption moved you, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who appreciates a story with depth, and subscribe for more emotional deep dives into the complexities of the human heart.